Welcome to the East Ward Update. I'm Derwin Montgomery. On today's show, I'm talking about the 2013-2014 fiscal year budget. I'll be speaking with City Manager Lee Garrity about some of the factors that are important to the budget. But first, I'm joined by our Director of Budget and Evaluation, Ben Rao. Why don't you give us a little bit about who you are and what you do here?
Thank you, Councilman Montgomery. My name is Ben Rao. I'm the Director of the Budget and Evaluation Office. I've been with the City of Winston-Salem for 16 and a half years. Started my career here as a Budget and Evaluation Analyst and worked my way up to Senior Budget Analyst and eventually Deputy Budget and Evaluation Director. So it's been my entire career here with the City of Winston-Salem.
All right, so right now we're getting right now into the midst of the budget season. And what that means is that you and your office is greatly involved in this process along with the City Manager's Office and others in trying to help us compile what will be the 2013-2014 budget. Will you tell us a little bit about some of the things that we're facing this year?
Yes. Really two challenges facing us coming into the 2013-2014 budget. We're still dealing with the effects of the Great Recession. Our sales tax receipts are not at the same levels that they were prior to the recession. Our inspection permit fees are also still down, not at the same level, and that's mainly because of our development activity still being lower than it was prior to the recession. So we're still trying to manage our expenses against a lower revenue stream. But in addition to that, 2013 is the year for a countywide reappraisal of real property. The Forsyth County Tax Office right now has issued those revaluation notices, and on average, the real property tax base is decreasing by 10% for the city. And that amounts to about a $7 million impact on our property tax revenues. So really our two main challenges are really based on the revenues coming into the city.
So we're facing reduced revenues, and so with that means there's a gap in budget, in the budget that we're going to have to be looking at. How do we close that gap?
That's correct. In January, city staff presented an early forecast of the budget to the City Council, showing about an $8 million gap, and most of that from the impact of the revaluation of real property. And so one of the issues that we're dealing with is how to reset the tax rate in order to offset the impact of the revaluation.
And if we were looking at just an increase of tax rate, do you have any idea what percent increase or what cent increase that would mean that taxpayers would be looking at?
Well, we're still looking at exactly what we will propose in the 2013-14 budget. The revenue neutral rate that we showed to the council back in January was about 53.5 cents, but we're getting updated information every month from the county tax office, and so it's still very much a work in progress as far as exactly what we're going to propose in the 13-14 budget.
Help us understand what revenue neutral means.
Yes, sir. Revenue neutral means that we reset the rate such that the city will receive the same amount of revenue that it would have received if we had not gone through a revaluation. In a normal revaluation year where we expect tax values to go up, you would typically see the tax rate adjusted down so that we don't experience any kind of windfall in the amount of property tax revenue that we receive. This year is particularly challenging because we're actually seeing property values drop. And so in order to make sure that we bring in the same amount of revenue that we would have if we didn't go through a revaluation, then the rate would have to be reset up. And so that's the term that we use, revenue neutral, in order to in terms of resetting that tax rate.
Right, and so revenue neutral means pretty much that the city will take in the same amount of money at that tax rate as it did before, meaning that it won't take in any more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that taxpayers will be paying the same amount that they've been paying previously, correct?
That is correct. That is when we say revenue neutral, we mean in terms of what's coming into the whole city budget. On an individual basis, a taxpayer may see their tax bill increase, or they could see it decrease depending on exactly what happened to the value of their particular property. In the case of this year's revaluation, if real values are going down 10%, if somebody's property is either decreasing less than 10% or not changing or actually increasing, then they will probably see their tax bill increase. But if the value of their property is decreasing more than 10%, then they will see their tax bill decrease.
Right. So this is something that has to have some real firm eyes taking a look at, because it's a process that could have potential widespread impact across citizens across the city, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we talked about revaluation and the impact that has on tax dollars coming in, but then you also said there's other portion of that, revaluation and tax property tax values are not the only thing that we're looking at, although that has a major impact. Year over year, we just see overall expenses for just services continue to increase, although revenues don't always increase at the same rate.
That is correct. And that has been our trend over the last several years, where just the cost of doing business is outpacing the growth in our revenue streams, in terms of our employee benefits, our pension, to meet our pension obligations, health care expenses, those types of expenses. Just the general cost of supplies and fuel, those have all been factors that have driven growth in our expenditures.
Right, and as somebody who has spent their career here in the city of Winston-Salem, particularly working with budget, how do you feel that our budget office has prepared for these type of issues?
Well, I think that every year since I've been with the city, we've had a gap going into the budget process, and we've looked at a number of measures over the years to help bring the budget into balance. We're required by state law to balance the budget, but we've looked at measures both on the expenditure side and on the revenue side, but a lot on the expenditure side in recent years to try to keep our costs down. So, efforts to increase the efficiency of our operation by looking at our staffing levels and in some cases reducing the number of positions that we have, doing general across-the-board reductions in certain line items of the budget, whether it's travel or supplies, basically just some general belt tightening, deferring maintenance on some of our facilities, which we know could eventually cost more down the road. Also deferring the replacement of vehicles to make sure that we get a little more life out of the equipment that we have before we really truly feel like we need to replace it.
Right, and so one thing I have seen in terms of being a member of council is that a lot of the dollars that we look at spending, some areas, just like you said, in terms of some things we look at deferred maintenance, some things we really do push in order to get the greatest and most use in terms of lifespan out of a lot of things that we have. And so there's a trade-off sometimes in doing those things in terms of the level of capacity that you get out of something when you push it all the way to its lifespan compared to others. But that's the whole process of trying to make sure that we're spending citizens' dollars the way that they need to be spent, and not just spending them just because we want to replace them and have something new in that process.
That's correct. When we look at the equipment that needs to be replaced, the question we ask ourselves, what equipment is in the most critical need to be replaced, and that's what we focus on. We want to make sure that the equipment that might be costing us a lot to maintain, that we do address those needs, but others where we may ideally like to follow some kind of replacement schedule, sometimes we've had to draw that schedule out in order to stretch our dollars.
Right. And this year we had something that was very interesting. We had the Citizens Committee that actually made some recommendations to council and to staff on some things that they thought could be reduced in order to help us face this budget cycle.
That's correct. The City Council created the Citizens Organizational Efficiency Review Committee in September of last year, a 9-person committee made up of business executives, nonprofit leaders, former city employees, and also the chair of our Citizens Budget Advisory Council. This 9-person committee was charged with looking at the city's operations, in particular looking at our efficiency, our staffing, our organization. In February, they presented a report to the Finance Committee that identified over 40 recommendations totaling about $4.7 million in budgetary savings. And they looked at measures that increase the efficiency of the organization. They did look at the revenue side and then fees, and they had a number of recommendations calling for an increase in fees that perhaps haven't been adjusted in 5 to 10 years. And then they also looked at reducing expenditures that may have an impact on service levels. So they looked at a wide range of options.
Yeah, and I think it's good to understand that process, because even before you all get even more deeper in this process, there's already been a process where citizens have been engaged in the process. And just tell a little bit more about how from here the process is going to move forward.
Sure. May 23rd, the city manager will submit his proposed 2013-2014 budget to the City Council. Then over the course of the next few weeks, the Finance Committee will be holding, I think, about 4 workshops to go over the budget in detail. In addition to that, the Finance Committee will also hold a public hearing to receive citizen input about the budget. Now, all the budget workshops that they hold are also open meetings. They're also open to the public. And then on June 17th, the full City Council will consider the budget for adoption, and at that time there will also be another public hearing, the one that's required by state law for citizens to provide input on the budget.
All right, well, appreciate you coming in and just sharing a little bit about the budget process, your role in that process. Is there anything else you'd like to share with citizens about what we're doing now in this budget season?
Just I would just recommend to watch the budget workshops on TV 13, to stay informed about the issues that we're dealing with.
All right. When I return, I'll welcome City Manager Lee Garrity.
It's Dirty Bird. Dirty Bird, don't dump waste into the stream. This is Lenny the lifeguard saying, hop to it, protect our water.
Welcome back to the East Ward Update. I'm joined now by our City Manager, Lee Garrity. Lee Garrity, City Manager, City of Winston-Salem. Won't you introduce yourself to citizens?
Hi, I'm Lee Garrity, the Winston-Salem City Manager.
And as City Manager, you are charged with pretty much running day-to-day operations of the City of Winston-Salem. Citizens elect council, and council hires and retains a City Manager that does the heavy lifting of day-to-day operations.
That's correct. You and the rest of the council, with the mayor, set policy, and your expectations is that I ensure that they're carried out and carried out successfully.
Right. So just finished talking with Ben, who is the Director of Budget, and in that discussion we talked a little bit about what we're looking at and facing in the 2013-2014 budget and some of the issues that we're facing, looking at a gap that we're going to be faced. That's in part by just rising cost of doing business, but in large part also about the reduction in tax revenues that are coming into the city. And so you talked about some of the things that we're looking at in helping to close that gap, opportunities potentially of a revenue neutral tax rate, some reductions in areas and being more efficient based upon some of the reviews we've seen. As a manager, what is the perspective that you take in really dealing with the budget?
Yeah, the budget is the most important policy document that City Council passes each year. It sets the spending levels for all the different policy objectives that City Council wants to carry out. So it is the one time each year that Council makes a very deliberate statement about everything that city government does. So as we go through it every year, we look at those policies that you've asked us to carry out and how can we most efficiently do it? How can we control the taxes and the fees, limit those because no one wants them to go up if you can avoid it, and how can you get more efficient services while still delivering that same level that council has asked for. So they have expectations, you have expectations about what we do to maintain the community, to make sure that the streets are paved and that the potholes are patched, and how can we do that efficiently with the money that we have. So each year we start out with an assumption, okay, is there a way we can do it cheaper, better, smarter without reducing city services? It is a challenge because every year costs go up.
Right, and then as you said, this is a document that helps direct spending for the entire year. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like when you hear people even in your own household, you have to make a budget, or you should make a budget to help guide your spending. And you pretty much put your money where your mouth is. You put your money in the places that seem to be important to you. You know, we hear often discussions of from federal levels about unfunded mandates where they require you to do something but don't fund it. It's a difficult task on the city level to do those type of things. If council wants the manager and staff to do things, certain things, there has to be dollars to help equip them to do that. And so as we're looking at this budget cycle now, there have been a lot of things that have been talked about in media in terms of how we're looking at reducing the budget potentially. One part of that has been a talk of Lawrence Stroll Coliseum as well as Bowman Gray Stadium, which would have a direct budget implication in terms of dollars being reduced on an annual basis.
You're correct. As we look at both facilities, and the universities approached us about the potential of purchasing them, it really is about whether the city wants to stay in the business of operating those facilities. And if we choose to stay in the business, the cost that we have to continue to bear versus if we got out of the business. So it really is a multiple decision, because you've got to look at those policy issues of what you want to do with those public facilities, and then on top of that, what the cost is. So it's the cost and the benefit. We have the potential of saving $30 million over 20 years. And so I think we have to look at it, but again, look at it very carefully to see what the trade-offs are.
Right, and you know, talk about $30 million. Somebody say you're going to save $30 million, and they say that their eyes pop open and say, okay, how are you going to actually save $30 million?
Right. And it's not like we're going to get a check tomorrow for $30 million, but if we no longer own those facilities, we would save $400,000 a year in operating funds. We'd save over $1 million a year in debt payments, because the debt on both buildings will be paid off, and we would avoid another $15 million in repairs that we know will have to be done in the next few years for both facilities. So if you add that up over the next 20 years, what we would save in operating, what we'd save by paying off the debt, and save in avoiding other expenses, it's $30 million. But for next year's budget, it's only $400,000 in operating savings.
Right, and so I think it is something that we have to take a look at, but whether or not we actually do that, that'll be something that in the coming weeks and months we'll actually make a firm decision on if we really want to go down those roads or not. We have had opportunities for community input and for them to have discussion and dialogue with both staff and council in those. You know, there are some legitimate concerns that come up in that process about retention of name, access by community, if these resources are no longer held by city government, correct?
Absolutely. Those are very important concerns that the community has about the assets. They were built with taxpayer dollars. They were built with bond referendums. So it's very important, if the council decides to sell them, that legally there are major restrictions that allow the public to have access and respect those names of both facilities.
Right. Okay, so beyond the Coliseum, Bowman Gray opportunities for impact on the budget, what are other ways that can be seen on potentially having a reduction in closing that gap we're looking at?
Again, you already talked with the budget director about the potential for over $1 million, well, over $2 million in savings from the Citizens Committee. In addition, we're looking every day at every option we have. 2/3 of our budget involves personnel and benefits and those type of things, because we don't make things. We're a service organization, so most of our costs are for people and for the related expenses. So we're always looking for, can we control our health care costs? How much can we afford to do in pay raises? This past year, council made a very difficult decision to change our police pension system for new hires, not for existing police officers, but for new hires, to control that cost. So those are things ongoing that we have to look at. And then past that, it really comes down to choices of service levels. We could always change service levels, but that does impact a lot of citizens.
Right, and I'm glad you bring that up, because there's some people out there who say, well, if the city's dealing with the $7 million gap, they should just find $7 million and cut $7 million. Don't mess with my tax rate, because I don't want to pay any more in taxes. And although with what we're looking at here, because of revaluation, some may pay more, some may pay less, and some may be even in where they are. But some people say, just don't mess with my tax rate. That will have a direct impact on service levels if just tomorrow we woke up and we said we're cutting $7 million out of the current budget.
Absolutely correct. I mean, we've been cutting since 2008, when the economy took the big dive. We've been cutting while not cutting services. We actually have less employees than we had in 2008. Our budget's actually lower than it was in 2008. It is at the point that if we had to absorb that $7 million reduction, there would have to be services eliminated. It can't be done just by tightening our belt.
Right, and because there were several things in the Citizens Review Committee's report that would have affected services that didn't necessarily make it to a recommendation from council. There was discussions about closing some parks that were underutilized. That didn't make it forward in that process, but still there could potentially be conversation about that stuff and other areas. What are some other things that could potentially affect service levels if they were cut?
There's some major reductions suggested. One, to eliminate the annual bulky item collection that's so popular with our citizens. Another recommendation was to significantly reduce our collection of brush at the curb, another service very popular across the city. I mean, there are many things that could be done, and the Citizen Committee, they came at it from, okay, we're going to look at it as a business. I even told them, let council look at the other policy issues. They just looked at, okay, what would we have to cut if we had to cut $7 million? But all of those reductions would be significant to the community if we reduced, particularly those sanitation services.
Right, and even in some of those recommendations, there were personnel kind of things that were discussed, and there were some things about some grant-funded positions within the police department that the city took advantage of, I believe, in 2009, and as well as some positions within fire inspections department. Can you tell us a little bit about what impact that has? Because when you talk about police, you know, some people will say, well, if you're reducing police, is that going to make me less safe?
Those 25 positions were in addition to our regular force that came out of a stimulus package from the federal government. So we already had a standard level of service, a high level of service, and we added those 25 positions. The recommendation from the committee and from City Council was to eliminate 10 out of those 25. They are all vacant positions. No police officer will lose their job, and it doesn't reduce the level of service on the street. We have 10 to 20 vacancies all the time in law enforcement because of normal attrition. So that can be.
What's attrition?
Attrition is normal retirements, employees who leave to go to other places, just turnover, people who leave. Normal turnover, 2 to 3 police officers leave the city a month. So based on that, we always have a certain amount of turnover. So those 10 positions will not reduce public safety at all.
All right, and so that means that we took on 25 extra officers within the police department in 2009, increased the number of allowed officers by that 25, and this is only going down by 10, which means we'll still have a higher number of officers than pre-2009.
Correct, and funded by the city. I mean, initially those 25 were paid for completely by a federal grant, but now the 15 would be funded by the city, so we would still be at a higher level than before the grant. And
still providing high level of service to citizens.
Absolutely.
Right.
We have one of the best call response times in the state, so we have a high level of service.
Right, and then also there was discussion even within about fire department and inspections. I know we've heard both sides, particularly from council and staff on one side about what they do and how they do what they do. This is about being efficient.
It is about being efficient. We are looking at our fire inspectors and looking at the number of inspections they do a day. And in fact, we are comparing right now to make sure the benchmarks looking at other cities, but we're trying to ensure that our fire inspectors are doing what we think is the maximum efficiency of the number of inspections a day. And we felt that we could reduce the number of inspectors if we increase their workload per day. But we're still looking at that very carefully. It's coming back to Public Safety Committee in 2 weeks.
Right, so this is not an easy process.
No.
These are not easy decisions to be made.
No, they're not, and they also involve people. In the case of the fire inspectors, they're filled positions. In the case of the sale of the Coliseum, there are 38 filled positions. They are not easy decisions to make.
Right, and so you know, we have to be, as a city, you know, citizens look at this process, and you know, there'll be some who will be pleased within the process. There'll be some who won't be pleased. If citizens still have suggestions that they want to make on things that could help reduce the budget, how can they have impact?
We already have. They can come to our website at any time. We've got a citizen suggestion form. They can also call 311 and give us their ideas. During the budget, we'll actually have an additional push for those questions oftentimes citizens, they're out there and they see things directly and they have good ideas. So we encourage citizens to give us their ideas. I had a call this morning from a citizen about something related to vehicles. So it's a good thing to do. They are the stockholders. They own city government.
Right. As of just yesterday, listening to the radio and heard a suggestion on the radio talking about city budgets and something I may have some conversation about. So I think that the more citizen engagements we have, understanding and seeing what they see on a daily basis, I think only helps city government be better.
It really does. And I always say that local government comes down to each neighborhood, and each neighborhood knows their issues. And the best neighborhoods have engaged neighbors who engage the city, talk to us, give us their ideas, express their concerns, and they all care about quality of life.
And in terms of just overall efficiency in city government, would you say that today we probably have a more efficient city government compared to times past, although we probably still have needs in other areas, but because we've been pressed by budgetary constraints to do more with less?
Yes, I'd say we're very efficient. We compare ourselves to the other cities in North Carolina. The state as a whole has very efficient government agencies compared to other states across the country. But even within North Carolina, we do well when we compare to others. In fact, if you look at the level of services we provide, and then you add up all of our taxes and the equivalent fees and compare it to the other 4 cities, we have the lowest combined tax and fee structure of any of the 5 cities, and yet provide a very high level of service.
All right, well, appreciate you taking the time out and coming and just talking to citizens and letting them hear about your perspective as a manager on this budget process. Anything else you'd like to let them know?
I just want to encourage all the citizens to participate, and I want to thank you for your engagement in this process. It's so critical to the city.
Well, thank you, and there'll be some more opportunity, particularly in the East Ward, for citizens to have some engagement. May 30th, we will have a opportunity at St. Paul United Methodist Church, a budget meeting just for talking and looking at that time your budget that you're proposed to council will be out, and so it'll have a little more detail, specifics, and give citizens opportunity to engage and have more conversation and dialogue about potential sale of Bowman Gray Coliseum, and Bowman Gray and the Coliseum, and just other areas of the budget that they want to have impact in. So I encourage them to be engaged on that level as well. So again, thank you, City Manager Garrity, for being here. Again, I'd like to thank you for watching the program today. Remember, you can see this show in its entirety on the city's website and YouTube page. I'm Derwin Montgomery, council member of the East Ward. Thank you again for watching.